Comedian Bill Maher says that Democrats need an outsider in the 2028 presidential race, and he has a suggestion: Stephen A. Smith.
Maher joined Smith's podcast, Straight Shooter, to discuss the next election. Smith asked Maher if he sees any frontrunners who can derail President Trump and fight back.
Here was Maher's response.
I see somebody right here in my Zoom camera, and by the way, only for you, Zoom. I hate Zoom. The Democrats, the reason why, I'm taking you a little more seriously for this is because the Democrats definitely need an outsider. You're the only one I hear who doesn't look like he cares what the other Democrats will say about it.
I don't care. And I really don't.
Right,
I
know.
I don't give a damn what they say. I really don't.
I know.
Maher then said that only someone with that kind of mindset will win back former Democratic voters who have switched over. Earlier in the show, Smith attacked a handful of other Democrats, two of which might be his 2028 primary opponents. Let's listen.
You, Jasmine Crockett, you're calling them everything under the sun. How's that going to work? If it serves to alienate folks because they're saying you're just him on the other side of the aisle. AOC, I believe, can win the Senate seat in New York over Chuck Schumer. I don't think she'll win the presidency.
Smith wasn't done there. He slammed one more high-profile Democrat, Gavin Newsom. Let's watch.
Gavin Newsom's talking about potentially running for the president. Actually, he's not talking about it. He's trying to avoid talking about it, but we all know what he's doing because he has to leave the gubernatorial seat in 2026, or the governor's seat in 2026. We know what he wants. You think they don't have clips of how you embraced extreme leftist policies during the whole woke movement and cancel culture and everything else? You think they don't have those clips? You think they didn't see people getting arrested and let out of jail the same day? You think they don't have footage of crime ravaging?
I love Stephen A. Smith, but I do not want to hear 4 years of that man screaming at the podium, okay? He's going to be, whether it's sports, politics, culture topics now, he literally is just always screaming. And I hate that we have to go to okay, who's the loudest? And he's a journalist, accomplished, successful businessman. But why do we have to go to the loudest and the most available entertainer to figure out who's going to save the Democratic Party? We're going to have to go off policy. And I know that President Trump was completely apolitical in some ways because he's this outsider that came into the Republican space and kind of dominated because he was that. But I don't know. I think Bill Maher also, people suggested that he should run for president. It's okay, people have suggested Colbert. Who else was it? The other late night show on Comedy Central. You're like, girl, I'm not watching. But people have suggested so many people. And I'm just okay, or we could just come up with a plan and see who's a rising star because of also track record policy, but also maybe just an outsider that actually has another track record in business or something that we want to work with, as opposed to let people who commentate comment.
I don't know. I appreciate what he said about Gavin Newsom. I think he's right that he thinks he's going to be able to run away from these very progressive California-centric policies and sort of position himself as the new moderate, in contrast to, let's say, Zohran Mamdani, who obviously can't run for president, but is perhaps representative of the more progressive wing of the party. And just like what happened to Kamala when she became the nominee ahead of the November election, people were bringing up her past statements and doing the compare and contrast and saying, well, when you were on the campaign trail in 2020 running for the Democratic nomination, you said something very different than what you're saying right now. And that type of flip-flopping in inauthenticity doesn't always translate well to voters. And that's going to be a significant problem, I think, for Gavin Newsom.
Well, I think one thing that stuck out to me about what Stephen A. Smith was saying was that, when he talked about Jasmine Crockett, how are you going to take this tone? And even Gavin Newsom, if we talk about his tone, he's been fighting fire with fire. To me, very hilarious with President Trump on his tirades on social media saying, okay, thank you, come again, or however President Trump writes his Truth Social post. And I think that that's one strategy. I don't think that Stephen A., of all people, should be coming at the way that people communicate. I think that Jasmine Crockett has been effective. And for young people, when you do have somebody who is, like Stephen A. Smith knows himself, over the top or, very direct and has a good energy that they can bring in, people want to see what they're doing. That's the first stage where you meet people who are uninterested in the minutia of the politics, reel them in, and then you talk policy after that. So I think both Gavin Newsom has the attention of the masses in a way that he didn't maybe a year ago, and so does Jasmine Crockett. I don't even know if that's on her agenda to try to run for president, but he specifically is criticizing people as they're in the early stages of what would be a presidential election. Right now is just the time to see, is there an appetite for you? Are people interested? I mean, President Trump does the same thing. He's comments on certain topics. He puts a picture of an auto pen up in the office, like for President Biden. Like, he does these things, right? He also has to follow up with policy, and to me, a lot of policy that doesn't really make sense based on what he campaigned on. But policy anyway, nonetheless, raising the debt by, billions, whatever, with the big, beautiful bill.
The Democrats want to raise it more.
Policy that doesn't really make sense to me, but it's still nonetheless policy. But I think that's a weird criticism, to tell people not to try to galvanize people with boisterous statements and fighting Trump's fire with fire, because the president himself does that. So how do you find a similar person if people are unafraid of like allowing us to be a little unbuttoned and have conversations in these ways, if they don't meet him where he's at, unbuttoned, and have the conversation in those ways?
I like to watch Jasmine Crockett in the way I like to watch a train wreck, but that's how I feel. But I think Stephen A. Smith is onto something in terms of the Democratic establishment, in a lot of ways, is not really learning the lessons from the last election and really changing in a way that is more appealing to independents and average Americans. The language, the tone may change, but if the policies underneath that are still the same, then they're still going to have that big 80-20 gap on really key issues like immigration, like crime, like transgender issues, and a lot of the quote-unquote woke stuff, as Stephen A. Smith calls it in that clip. I also am curious, because we didn't get to talk about this week, this is our first time on together, what you think of the Kamala book, and is it an indication that she's trying to position herself for 2028? And if so, how successful was this like mega catharsis and sort of, I would describe it as finger-pointing book?
So as I heard her diagnosis of why she wrote the book, because I was confused and honestly frustrated. One, because Biden is not president anymore. Two, because he has cancer. And three, like, we're just going on and on about this man that wasn't president, and just jump it from Karine Jean-Pierre to the Jake Tapper book. Karine Jean-Pierre switched parties and then writing a book, Kamala writing a book, Jake Tapper writing a book, and then everybody just jumping.
And Jill Biden, I think, is writing one.
Yeah, okay already.
Yeah.
I'm just exhausted by it. But she wanted to say, let the history record in her words show what she believes happened in this historic campaign, because it was historic. It hasn't happened in our country's history where you have 100 days to run and you're automatically the candidate. Lots of things. There was a lot that she said in there. I think when she's talking about the way that her and Biden were communicating, some of the petty things that may or may not have happened behind the scenes, to me, the overall point that I take issue with is the fact that now you're saying things that should have been corrected if it was such an emergency to not have President Trump have a second term. The dialogue around him winning a second term was very much, it's an emergency. It very much was like, this is the end of times. We heard the word fascist way too more than I'm comfortable with, right? All these things that, it's not the worst of times. The worst of times in our country was slavery. It was plenty of worst of times. Hopefully we never are in a situation like that. So I just think that if it was that bad to her through her purview, you cannot just sit there and watch this play out. If Biden isn't a cognitive decline or not, even if you don't think he's going to win the next election, you can't even watch this play out. Everybody should have rallied against Jill Biden and said, you don't make the decisions here. This is an emergency. We have to jump in and correct course. And I think that then we would have had an actual opportunity to put people up against each other to see who the next nominee would have been, and the Democrats probably would have had a better chance of winning. So it's frustrating, but I do think that she's probably trying to align herself up to run again, because she first has to separate herself from Biden in many ways, which she said on The View she didn't understand how significant that was by answering that question and saying, oh, I wouldn't change a thing, or something I'm paraphrasing about how Biden led. And so I think now that she understands that, she is separating. But it's just now up to the voters. Do they trust that? Do we want to see the same exact thing play out? We know that when she primaried against Biden, she didn't really do well. And so, Bernie Sanders did better. So I'm just trying to figure out what the next strategy is and how this further rips the Democratic Party apart, to show that there is no next step, no next path, as opposed to, okay, we're on a mission. We collected ourselves. We had that failure in November. We're ready to start over. And so, it's a little frustrating, because I still haven't heard a consistent, poignant plan for the future.
To end on a lighter note, did you read the portion of her book about Doug Emhoff and their big fight?
No.
Oh, I have to tell you about this. Okay, so apparently Kamala was traveling to Pennsylvania to meet up with Doug for her 60th birthday while she was on the campaign trail. And she got really angry because when she got there, she found out that he hadn't really planned anything for the birthday, and that the staff had to book the hotel, and She decides, yeah, understandable, but she decides to go take a hot bath so she doesn't freak out on Doug. And as she's getting out of the bath, she realizes she forgot a towel. So she tries to call for Doug, and he doesn't respond. And she finally calls him on the phone, and he's like, "Hey, what's up?" And she said, "Are you freaking serious? I need a towel." And it apparently led to the biggest fight of their marriage. And after that, Kamala instructed her aides, or her aides instructed Doug, rather, that she was going to be away for 5 days, and he needed to write her a love letter for every single day so that they could put it on her pillow at the end of the day, and she could read her love letter from Doug.
This sounds very much like The Notebook over fantasizing life. I could tell you right now, Colin, my partner, would be like, listen, you ain't getting the letter. Like, but if Doug, did he do it?
Are we married to the same person?
Did he do it?
He did.
Oh, he wrote the letter?
Yeah.
Oh, well, hats off to that man.
I guess, yeah.
Good man.
He's a sensitive guy. I don't know. Yeah, my husband would be like,
you're not dictating me how to
and get
out
your
of this
damn
fight.
towel.
Well, we can agree on that at least.
We have a lot more to talk about on Rising. Stay with us.